Welcome everybody to today's webinar. My name is Samantha Sutherland. I'm the moderator for today's conversation. I also host Work 180's podcast, Equality Talks. So if during isolation you're looking for something to entertain yourself, please check out Equality Talks on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. So I'll just introduce Work 180 and then I'll talk to you about our panelists who we have joining us, a bit of the just housekeeping for the session today, and then we'll jump straight into the session because we really want it to be practical and helpful and useful for you. So Work 180 is on a mission to empower every woman to choose a workplace where they can thrive. As an advocate for working women, we provide job applicants with a directory of endorsed employers who support diversity, inclusion and equality. And on our website, we share a lot of information around pay equity, flexible working, paid parental leave, and a range of other really important criteria. All of our endorsed employers go through a really detailed pre-screening process to make sure they meet our criteria. And right now is a really exciting time for workplace equality. We're so passionate about it, and at Work 180 we're just getting started. So today's session is around managing anxiety and mental health through the COVID disruptions and beyond. I will do a formal introduction to our panelists, but before I do that, I just want to hand over to Cam, who is one of the people talking to us today, who's going to do a really quick welcome to gauge how people are feeling today. And we're going to get you involved in the chat box and make it really interactive and useful. So Cam, I'll pass over to you now. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sam. So everyone, at the moment with anxiety or even just with role complexity, when you think about your own lives and your work, I'd like you to gauge whether or not it's increased in either anxiety or just role complexity, role volume, role load, or not. Maybe you're hanging cool in the Bahamas. So I want you to use a 10-point scale. I want you to go to the chat function now and enter in a number between 1 and 10. Now 4, 5, 6 is it's about normal for me, no real change. All the way up to 7, 8, 9, 10, which is like it's much more complex, more role, potentially more anxiety, or 1, 2, or 3 out of 10, which is actually, it's all gotten very much easier for me. So I'd like you to all go into the chat function and just do that now, and let's all just see with everyone how we're all going together. Because it certainly seems from what I'm seeing and what you're all seeing that there is a preponderance for it's a higher than usual stress time, higher work role, complexity and volume. So it's nice to know that we're not alone here, that we're all experiencing this together. And if you are struggling a bit, well, then there's good reason for that. So thanks, everyone.
So you can see the numbers coming through there, and there's a lot of 7s and 8s. There's a few people with 5 or a 4, and some people right up at a 9 or a 10. So a lot of people are feeling that there's an increased level of anxiety or pressure because of everything that's going on at the moment. And as Cam said, I think it's really helpful to know that you're really not alone through this period in feeling like that. Mm. So I'll introduce our panelists more formally now. So Cam Aggs was the first person, Cameron Aggs. He is one of Australia's foremost mindfulness training specialists. Sorry about the noise. This is working from home during COVID. There's cleaning in the hallway. So Cameron has facilitated more than 200 professional mindfulness training programs in Australia and the UK. He's a clinical psychologist, an internationally published author on mindfulness, and is passionate about making mindfulness intuitive and easy to apply. Then we have Kerry O'Brien. Give us a wave, Kerry. She's a volunteer connector at PowerLink Queensland for their Mates in Energy, which is a mental health and suicide prevention program for energy industry employees. So Kerry is a landholder relations advisor for PowerLink. She's active in local and global women in leadership and STEM initiatives. She advocates for women in regional, rural and remote areas, and she coaches women in community AFL, drawing on up to Olympic level experience, which is really amazing. And then finally, I'd like to introduce David Reed, if you give us a wave too. So David is a forensic mental health clinician who also runs a mental skills coaching consultancy for people and organizations striving for elite performance. He currently consults to a number of individual performers, athletes and coaches, as well as corporate businesses, and a number of sporting franchises, including Essendon Football Club, the Melbourne Stars Big Bash, and the Chennai Super Kings, which is part of the Indian Premier League. So today we've got some questions that we've pre-prepared with our panelists, and then we'll open the floor to questions from all of you at the end. If we're going through the sessions and you have a question, please feel free to type a question into the chat box. At the end of the session, we'll unmute you if you want to talk about your question as well. And I can see everybody's got their videos off, but if you want to turn them on, we really love that too. We can see your faces and it feels a bit more like we're interacting with you. There's no pressure, but if you want to, you're most welcome to turn your videos on. So we'll jump right in. Cameron, you're a clinical psychologist and a specialist in corporate-focused mindfulness programs. So what are you seeing in your clients and more generally at the moment in terms of that increased anxiety and work-related stress that you just asked everybody here about as well?
Yeah, certainly my clinical practice, I've been noticing an increase in distress, both in terms of anxiety and rates of depression. But the kind of complex, it seems like nobody's really escaping at the moment. So it might be by dint of increased work or increased home pressures. And it certainly feels like there's also this global pressure, you know, internationally, politically, geopolitically. There's all sorts of ways in which our sense of well-being and ease in the world is being constrained at the moment. Which is where, you know, later on in today's session, I'll be focusing so much on active acceptance of our emotions and the difficulties that come with just making our way through this weird time in 2020.
Yeah, right. Kerry, when we spoke prior to this webinar, you mentioned there's a lot of increased pressure right now, and a lot of people have the tools to help themselves, but actually aren't really looking after themselves. So can you talk a bit more about that and what you're experiencing there? Oh, Kerry, sorry, you're muted. Sorry.
Yeah, okay, that's all right. I mean, I think we find that we're swimming in a lot of information resources at the moment. A lot of businesses and corporations are just providing a plethora of tools and resources that we can access, but I don't think we always use them. And we forget to self-care. We don't actually think to look after ourselves. We forget to set boundaries and limitations. We have moved to a work from home scenario for many people where I'm working from my kitchen table. There's people working in their lounge rooms. There's people working on their outside benches. One of my colleagues is working from the tool bench in his shed because that's the only space we've got. But we've got to remember to care for others and care for ourselves. And I think sometimes we're finding it difficult to separate the personal side of our lives and now the professional side of our lives because they're so intertwined. And, you know, a lot of businesses and corporations are recommending programs to use, like at PowerLink we use Mates and Energy. People need to log in and check in on those as well. Just use them, the resources that are there. We need to acknowledge our limitations, but I think sometimes it's fundamental to make sure that our 9 to 5 doesn't turn into a 5 to 9 because everything gets blended together.
Yeah, I'm really noticing that at the moment. I think anybody who has children at home, it's really hard to be as productive during the day as you would be without them there. And so the sort of internal pressure to work much longer hours to try and get through the same volume of work while also trying to homeschool children is pretty hard. David, one of the things you've mentioned when we were talking is the importance of really normalizing what people are going through at the moment. And we had 150 people sign up for this webinar, so it's obviously affecting a lot of people. Can you talk a bit about what you're seeing and this idea of normalizing what people are going through at the moment and why that's important?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that the activity that Cam's just done is the best example that we could possibly have. A lot of people reporting 8 out of 10 in terms of their level of anxiety or distress. And that's concerning enough. And I think that being able to see that other people have a shared experience is exactly what I'm talking about when I'm saying the importance of normalizing. You know, we've been sitting with this uncertainty of the virus now for a number of months. And for us in the world of AFL today, I'm at Essendon. The season was suspended on the 22nd of March, and that initial period was very disorienting and overwhelming for everyone. There was so many role changes that everyone had to wrestle with, the financial uncertainty, partners losing jobs, worry about health, now homeschooling kids. It was a lot of uncertainty and it was an acute adjustment phase. And then I think as we've got into May, I think it's shifted a little bit. What I've noticed with the people that I'm consulting to is that for a lot of us, being confined to our houses has started to take its toll. I think it's really normal now to have a general malaise and a bit of a mental fog. And sense of fatigue and struggling for motivation is kind of the norm. And certainly for footballers, the slight difference for AFL footballers is that they're really starting to miss the intensity that comes with competing each day, which is a little bit maybe unique to them. But what I've learned through this period is that the players are actually quite lucky that they, as professional athletes, do a lot of work preparing themselves for managing stress and distractions. And for example, it's quite a young group of men that we're working with here, but we regularly discuss emotional exposure. We regularly discuss sitting with uncertainty. They sit with vulnerability each week before they go out to perform on a very public stage. So sitting with those difficult emotions, which Cam's going to talk about a bit later, but just the practice of observing their thinking and identifying what are helpful and unhelpful thoughts that are tied to anxiety. They get tested so often that they're actually in a pretty good place with that stuff. And so I just think that what I'm observing is an emotional roller coaster across the board, feeling stressed, confused, exhaustion, irritability, difficulty sleeping, and certainly anxiety, which was why I agreed to come on today, because I think it's a really important topic.
And what really jumped out at me about what you said just then too is just the sheer number of things that are happening that people can be affected by at the moment, because it's health and it's financial and it's your partner and it's being at home and it's being with kids and it's homeschooling and it's like thing after thing after thing that's causing this at the moment. It's not just one thing for anybody.
Yeah, it's a huge number of things to try and juggle when you actually sit down and list them out or talk about them. The number of variables is huge, and then the relative, the thing for me that's comforting is, I think that we're actually in a really good position compared to some other parts of the world. And I feel certainly very grateful for personally in my position. I think there's a guilt that goes with that, but I kind of feel like there's a lot of things to juggle, but there's also opportunities to be able to look at it and go, we're kind of fortunate in other ways as well.
Yeah. So for everybody who's here on this webinar with us, we really want to make this session practical and provide you with some tools to take back to your life with you. So now each of our speakers is going to spend a few minutes actually talking about one tool and diving into that tool with you. So it might help you if you're feeling anxious right now and be part of your toolkit when you go back into real life. So Kerry, we'll start with you. So you're going to be sharing a bit of a discussion on how you use scheduling and planning as a tool to manage your mental health, wearing multiple hats of employee, a leader, a member of work teams, and coaching and community networks. So I'll hand over to you, and you have the floor for some time now to talk to everybody about this.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Look, I really just want to give a personal reflection on, like you said, some of the hats that I wear, because when the COVID lockdown came, we were bombarded with a lot of tools and information, and I didn't actually adopt all of them to start with, and I found that I was starting to flounder around, and it was only when I started adopting some scheduling and some planning in my day and the tools that were being provided that I actually started to embrace the self-care. So initially, I didn't have the pre-work routine, but when I employed that into my day, like to get up in the morning, do the normal stuff that I would, it actually started to give me some grounding and some normality to the start of my day, and it really structured my day ahead. And then I also worked on having an agreed work plan for my role, but also within my team. And what this did was it allowed for the adjustment from working from home, the changes that we had with everybody scheduled. And again, it provided a bit of balance, because there were some people, like you said, that are homeschooling or have multiple people working from home, or people that are completely isolated because there is no one around them. So we needed that for that balance. But we also keep it flexible so we can adjust. I mean, the COVID response is evolving. Things are changing week by week. We can now start to move around a little bit more. So, well, depending on where you are, I guess. But, so we needed to provide a little bit of grounding and adjustment there. And I used to just use my calendar as something that I used to keep a tab on my meetings, and that's basically all I used to do. But now my calendar is my self-care tool. So in there, I've created blocks of time. They're colour-coded, they're labelled, they're chunks that provide me with allocated time, effective, that I can actually complete tasks. I found that I was accepting meetings left, right and centre. Everything was turning into a jumbled mess, and I had no routine. All I had was chaos. So now everything's colour coordinated, it's labelled, but I also open up my calendar now that's visible to people in my network, and I have my please book meetings here time slot, because it just helps channel and direct activity for my day. It gives me a little bit of structure, gives me time to breathe and to plan. And then in there, the essential things for me are my self-care breaks. So initially I would randomly put in, or not randomly, but I'd structure in my early morning walk, or I'd put in a sunshine break and an activity break. And I thought they had to be in certain places. And I found as I evolved through this COVID response that I actually performed and functioned much better in big chunks of work in the morning. And as the day progressed, I really needed to align to more self-care breaks. So I created that flexibility in my calendar. And now I use it all the time, every day. I reflect on it daily for my day ahead and tomorrow. I then reflect on it weekly. How did that go and how did I feel? Did I find times where it was chaotic? Did I find times where I could have worked better or more efficiently and gave myself some more self-care in the evenings or afternoons? And then I look at it fortnightly to see what I've missed, what's coming up, and how can I react, change, adapt, and make that a lot better for myself. But ultimately also making it better for others that work around me. So self-care for me and self-care for others. At the end of the day, I'm here on my kitchen table. This is my office at the moment. And I found that I was in my own personal space at the same time I was in my workspace. So, you know, we all heard that it's great to pack things away. It actually works. At night, I turn everything off, shut it all down, unplug it, and I go put it in another room. So I've actually commuted home from work. And so the commute's really important too. Mine's really short in a normal world, and work's not too far from me, but I enjoyed my evening walk home. So I planned that in as well. But I gave myself permission to set the bar appropriate to my workload and to what was agreed to for me to achieve in my role. But then I move into a stakeholder or a team-based context, and the rules change a little. And so I had to become awareness of the full-time staff and the part-time staff and the consultants and everybody else's work plans that were in there. So I started to encourage people I interact with to put their availability times in their calendar, in their email signature. It helps me plan in advance when someone's available. It takes the pressure off the people I'm working with because I know what their new work schedule is, what their agreed plan is. But I'm also allowing myself to be flexible so I can adapt as well. But I also allow myself to say, no, I can't do 3 things at once. So I've gone back to my team a few times and said, you know, would someone like to attend on my behalf? Can I have a proxy? Because I've got all these pressures and creates additional stress. So we've used proxies. We can use the record function like we're doing now for this one, because then not everyone can attend at the same time. But we've also pre-recorded sessions sometimes for meetings and catch-ups when we can't attend, but we still want to be involved in the content. So using some of those other things that we would not normally do. And I regularly still call people if I used to call them. I talk to them and say, is this the best way we're going to catch up at the moment? You know, what's your work schedule? We agree on the format, we agree on the time, we book it in, and we honour it, because we found that honouring those commitments that we've made with other people around us helped with my chaos and stress levels to keep them nice and reduced, but also to understand that someone else has probably made a real effort to schedule their life and their chaos and their stress around that booking as well. So that's really important to honour. And when you're working in groups, you've got task management tools you can use. You know, there's Trello and a few others. They can help with the more fundamental work-based timelines, milestones, project deadlines and things like that that you need to meet. They're visible to everybody in the team and they take a lot of the noise out of conversations. So you can just log in, check up and see where everyone's at. But then I moved into the community space. So I coach community women's football here in Queensland, and you know, we've got a wide range of people there. The diversity is huge. So we had people that were working, now not working. We had emergency frontline workers, we had mothers that were homeschooling, we had teachers and principals. So we had to find a way to care for ourselves and for them. We actually made virtual training sessions. We put them in the normal time slots that we would normally have training sessions. And then we agreed as a team on the number, the duration, the timing of those so that we could suit everybody as much as we could. We condense the content intentionally to get rid of some of the noise and to stop all the interference. We allow for weekly participation, but take out that strict routine because everybody's schedule's different. We set targets for those within that, for those that needed it. That provided motivation for those that were feeling isolated. And after our meetings and catch-ups, we provided, we reflected on them and we provided some summaries on the channels that we were using, so some of the media channels, so for example, messenger groups, that allowed for the social discussion to happen. It allowed for informative content, people to access when they can, and it also provided some direct instructions. So we used those channels, you know, they were multi-dimensional, and they helped people relieve their stress because they didn't feel they had to tune in when the kids want dinner and someone else is running around and I'm trying to work. We also set SMART goals, short-term SMART goals. So COVID response for us was no more football. What do we do? What are we training for? We're now looking towards a return to train and a return to play. So now our short-term SMART goals, so specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time-based, actually now have some purpose because we've now got timeframes that we can use. So basically scheduling and planning I can use in a personal employee side of my life. I can then bring some of those skills and then expand those when I'm working in teams and stakeholder groups. But then when I look into the diverse community networks too, I can, you know, use more tools to help, you know, cover everybody to make sure that we all get a really good experience out of this.
So I have one follow-up question from one of the early things you said, which is around how you schedule in self-care. And I'm wondering, with the increase in time pressures and like volume of work that people sometimes feel like they have, and adding in additional things that we didn't used to have to do, like homeschool kids, how do you justify to yourself and to your colleagues having this time blocked out to do self-care? Yeah, how do you give yourself permission for that? And how do you justify it if you need to at work when there's all this stuff that needs to be done, extra stuff at the moment?
Yeah, I guess I'm fortunate that our work, we have a real strong focus on fit for life and mental well-being. So to promote self-care is not something foreign, but it also, it takes a lot of dialogue within your team and within yourself to understand the importance of this. And I think if you find that if you try it for a couple of days and you start to feel the benefit, you actually feel the tension and the chaos and the stress relieve. And it just gives you that bit of clarification and it just reaffirms to you that this does work. So give it a go if you haven't. It's really worthwhile. The breath, the fresh air, the tension release and the fresh mind, you'll find that it really revitalises your working day.
Okay, great. Amazing. Thanks, Kerry, for sharing that. David, we're going to move on to you. So you are going to share some common thinking traps and how to manage those thoughts.
Yeah, I guess the starting point for me is to, in the interest of full disclosure, kind of acknowledge that this is my first pandemic, like all of you. So I don't want to be coming across as some sort of smooth talking person who has all the answers. That's absolutely not the case. So, but I do think it's absolutely critical to be exploring the content of our thoughts at the moment. I think anyone who is experiencing anxiety at any point in their life, you know, we can focus on just treating the physical symptoms of anxiety, like sweating or heart racing or whatever it is that's the somatic representation of the anxiety. But until we actually address the thinking patterns that sit underneath it, we're not going to get substantial long-term gains or improvements or relief. So I just think it's really important that the practical stuff is so critical right now that Kerry's talking about, like being really, it's something that we can control, and trying to take control of that as much as possible, I think is critical. And particularly amongst uncertainty, it's a normal thing to try and take as much control as you can of your environment. But in terms of thinking about thinking, which is what we call metacognition, it's just simply thinking about the content of our thoughts. We talk a lot here at the Footy Club about engaging your thinking in a planned way. So as I said before, the players spend a lot of time planning to perform in the face of huge distractions every weekend. And that actually helps them adjust to really quickly to whatever situation they find themselves in. And we base that on cognitive behavioural therapy, which is the most evidence-based psychological intervention certainly that I'm aware of. And that's a very simple, it's got a very simple framework, but it basically, the framework for those who aren't aware is that thoughts, emotions, and biology and behavior are all interconnected. And if you change one part of that system, you change the others. And so in just looking at thoughts, I think there's a lot of thinking traps that people are falling into at the moment. I know as someone who's trying to be really productive, I know that I fell into a bit of a trap of comparison, and my conversations with people, I think a lot of people are falling into that trap. I've got a mentor who at the start of the pandemic period, help-seekingly contacted me and said to me, Shakespeare wrote King Lear while he was under quarantine for the bubonic plague. So what are you going to do through this period? And it did spark a little fire in me, and I started frantically putting together workshops, and I've been delivering those workshops, and I put together like a small course, and just got into this cycle of I need to be productive. And then I was encouraging players, in their time away from the club to, pick up an instrument, learn a language, change the way you're exercising, enroll in a free Harvard class. A lot of them enrolled in free classes from overseas universities. And I kind of ended up noticing in both the people I was speaking to and myself that there's a real flip side to this. And that, I think that there seems to be a prevailing guilt for all of us, that we feel like if we feel that we aren't in the midst of some sort of productive period of drastic self-improvement, that we've somehow failed to use this time well. And I just think that that's a real trap, comparison, and this sort of sense of guilt for not being productive. And I think that we just need to be very gentle on ourselves at the moment. While we've been sitting in this situation for some time, we need to look at really being careful about the comparisons that we're making, and being careful about how we use social media right now. I just think it's okay if you're having difficulty sleeping. And I think if your diet's a little bit out of whack, I think that what we really need to be doing is learning how to sit with difficult emotional states and normalizing that. And Cam's going to speak to that a little bit more about some examples of how you might be able to do that. But I do think that if you're in a bit of an emotional storm right now, which is what I think anxiety is, I think we need to remind ourselves that we should probably be expecting a surge of kind of dark clouds to come over, but that, like the weather, we expect that will change fairly soon. So one of the things in terms of an intervention we're using with players and coaches here at Essendon around their thinking is that we're looking to try and train optimism by using gratitude prompts. So every day through the pandemic period, when they were away from the club, which was for 8 weeks, they returned back this week, they got a gratitude prompt that they filled in anonymously, and it just came to me, and I got to see whatever that sort of statement of gratitude was. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with that kind of thing, but as an example, if I said to you right now, I want you to kind of look away from your computer or your phone and look around your environment, scan your environment. I want you to try and find 3 things in your environment that are white. If you just look around and try and find 3 things that are white. And now if I ask you how many things that you found were red when you did that scanning, generally what we find is that people found a lot of things that were white and not many things that were a different color like red. And it's kind of a small example. I don't know how you went with that, or whether you actually did it, but that's kind of how the mind works. It finds what it looks for. So at the moment we're looking in this period of uncertainty, we're looking for signs of anxiety and fear. So when you experience a lot of stress, it's easy to head into a pessimistic spiral. And we know that during this pandemic period, our brains are actually looking for evidence of more uncertainty, anxiety, and fear. So we actually start scanning the world for danger, and then we respond accordingly. And it's a really important point, I think. In these times, it's really important to remind ourselves that we have some control over our perspective, and with subtle shifts in how we direct our thinking, we can actually practice to have a more optimistic attitude. So we talk about, engaging our thinking in a planned way, and the example of training optimism through things like gratitude journaling, or just having conversations over the dinner table about what went well today, I think is a really important starting point. And I think it kind of lends itself to a bigger, broader discussion around mental health more generally. And, I just think prior to this pandemic, the mental health outcomes in Australia were already deeply concerning as far as I'm concerned. The rates of anxiety, depression, were at record highs, and I think as a generation we're an addicted and obese and we're in debt more than any generation in history. And I think the good thing is coming out of this pandemic is that we're having things like this webinar today to talk about mental health outcomes. But the not so great things is it's taken a pandemic to actually stir the pot with some of these things. So in terms of thinking, I think training optimism by using gratitude prompts, I think, is a really important one, and being careful about comparison, particularly around productivity. That I feel like I should be doing more in my work role, in my parenting role, or whatever roles that you've got. And I think more broadly, something that I'm seeing with a lot of athletes, a lot of high-performing athletes have this underlying kind of belief that they must strive to meet their internal sort of expectations. And generally it's to avoid criticism. I see it all the time, working with athletes across multiple countries. And we call it unrelenting standards. And it's kind of tied to that perfection myth that, that our identity is somehow defined by success. The belief that no matter what we do, we need to be doing more. I just think there's some traps that are associated with that I think we can all relate to. That a trap is around a fear of other people's opinions, that maybe we're worrying about judgment or critique from others, or being consumed by outcomes at the moment is really actually unhelpful. And there's a bit of a cycle, a trap of self-critical thinking. And it basically comes down to a thought that for some reason what I'm doing is not enough. And the deeper level of that is that for some reason I'm not enough. And so a helpful thought to insert, that we ask players to insert all the time, live during games, leading up to games, in their interactions in the week between games, is that they are good enough and that what they're doing is enough. And so that they're enough as a footballer, as a parent, as a partner, as a son. And it's a very simple way of kind of getting out of that rabbit hole of self-critical thinking. So I think that there are a couple of things from my point of view. I don't want to speak for too long, and I just want to back up Kerry's point around revisiting some goals. I reckon coming out of this now, as we're hopefully doing, it's actually an awesome time to do that. We've just done it with our players. We talk a lot about purpose. We link our goals to purpose, and we do an activity with every player and coach here, which I encourage people to try and do, is explore, like, what am I trying to do here? What is the purpose of me being here? And then what is the vision for my future that I'm trying to achieve? And I think it's a great time to kind of realign to those things, because they may have had to change over this period. I'll probably keep talking if I don't stop.
I will pause you there so that we have time to talk to Karen as well. But yeah, I think what you've said, is that it's a chance for people to really realign right now is really true, because there is a bit of a reassessment going on by everybody. And on the gratitude practice thing, 3 years ago, I had a very tough year, and I decided to do the gratitude practice every day for a year. Brené Brown is someone who I love reading about. So if anyone who's listening hasn't heard, they should definitely look her up. And I wrote down 3 things that I was grateful for every day for a year, and it changed my life in ways that I would not believe had I not experienced it myself. So yeah, definitely support that recommendation.
Cool.
So Cam, we will move on to you now. So you've said that you're going to be focusing on emotional self-soothing tips for stress or strain, big or little, and how the 4 breaths technique can be used to provide a really small routine that people can include in their daily practice. So
absolutely. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, thank you very much. And so the emotional self-soothing routine that I'll focus us a little bit on, it builds on the infrastructure that Dave and Kerry have already spoken about. Dave, in terms of being gentle with ourselves and not being focused on unrealistic comparisons and unrelenting self-standards. And also Kerry's emphasis on protecting your time, using technology as your friend to have that boundary in place so that we have a platform for actually doing emotional self-soothing, which doesn't come easily to a lot of us, particularly those of you that are high achievers, have a history of top performance or aspiring to that. Coming back and being gentle and emotionally self-soothing can feel a little bit foreign. And so what I'll do now is I'll give us a couple of slides. I'll share my screen just to put some meat on the bones of this idea. And I'll provide us a resources page that you guys can use to to deepen your capacity to use the breath, to do the 4 breaths technique, and then from there as well. So I'll just share my screen now, and we can get started with that. So the question is, does Cam have the technological capacity to do what he intends? Let's see. So look, I'm assuming that this is working. Please let me know if it's not. And let me just start here with this slide. So what I'm suggesting is 4 things. That initially we need a sense of acceptance. The reality is, COVID or not, life is full of unwelcome events, which we can term emotional injuries. And it's interesting that we often don't think in these terms of emotional injuries, daily hurts and heartaches, setbacks and strains. But if we can think about that and to know that it's natural, if we define emotional events as kind of emotional injuries as things that we want to see happen, not happening, or unwanted things happening, well, then those things are daily occurrences, and they're all a part of living an engaged life. But the problem is we don't really factor in the fact that we're having daily hurts and heartaches. We just think we should always be pushing through. We should be winning. We should be, you know, and so it's about kind of coming back to the reality that if I'm going to be living an engaged life, I've also got to have a bit of a routine around soothing from the hurts and heartaches of your day. These injuries result in vulnerable feelings, feelings of fear, feelings of hurt feelings, yeah, and anger at times. And the question then becomes, how can we make room for them as they're happening? And how can we use the breath as a container to do that in real time? And so this is the focus of this part of the presentation. So I often talk in terms of 4 skills of mindfulness, and today I'm going to give a shout out to the first and third skill, the ability to effectively harness our breath for real-time stress reduction, and how that allows us to move into what I would call repair mode. So in terms of harnessing the breath, it builds a lot on what Dave's talking about around acceptance, around not judging ourselves relative to other people's standards or what we think we should be or who we should be or what have you. Breathing into emotional injuries with the idea of it's already here, let me feel it. It's already here, let me breathe it in. Let me breathe it in a way that allows me to repair this daily hurt and heartache, acknowledging, naming, and nurturing myself through this feeling, ultimately placing it on the breath. So there's 2 mechanisms for placing difficult feelings on the breath. One of them is the 2 hands, and the other is the 4 breaths technique. Whereas the 2 hands technique is about actually building capacity, the 4 breaths technique is actually about delivering through this technique. And the reason why I talk about building capacity is most of us don't breathe into our bellies naturally. And if we're not belly breathing, we're not actually going to switch from stress and strain into rest and repair. And this is really crucial. So what I want everyone to do now, please, is just place 1 hand on your chest, 1 hand on your belly, and just notice your breathing. Make sure the shoulders are lowered and relaxed. And I want you to try and see if you can push your belly out as you're breathing in. This sense of the breath, slow breath, long breath coming down into the bottom of the lungs. The bottom hand is moving more than the top hand. Now that might not be true for you at the moment. And if it's not, well then there's a resources page to help you train your breathing so you can really use your breath to maximum effectiveness. So as you do this technique, just give yourself a little rating. Is it 50-50, top hand, bottom hand is moving the same amount? Are you more in the top hand, 70-30, more in the bottom hand, 80-20, 90-10? Ultimately, you want the bottom hand to be moving almost 100% as the breath comes down into the bottom of the lungs and as it flows out again. And so I'd just like you to now write into the chat function, which I won't be able to see, but Sam, if you can just call this out, who's more in the top, who's more in the bottom hand. So if your more top hand is moving more, just write in top. If your more bottom hand is moving more, just write in bottom. And Sam, if you can just let me know what you're seeing there, please.
Yeah, we've got top, 50-50, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom, top. So it's a pretty even split actually between top and bottom.
Great.
Yeah, pretty even split.
Very good. So when we finish teaching the 4 hands technique, or 4 breaths technique, I'm sorry, I'll take you to a resources page. And for those of you that are more in the top, this resources page will be especially relevant for you. So Sam, I'm assuming that everyone can still see me even though I'm sharing my screen. Is that correct?
I can definitely still see you. If you can't see Cam, just put a note in the thing.
All righty.
Yeah.
So replicating that belly breathing as before. So maybe one hand on the top, one hand on the bottom. I want you to again get that sense of shoulders are relaxed and you're breathing into your belly. The breath is long and slow and gentle. I now want you to bring your thumb and forefinger together to do the 4 breaths technique. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to breathe in and out for 1, in and out for 2, in and out for 3, in and out for 4 breaths. Every time I breathe in, I move one more finger down, and I know I'm finished the 4 breaths technique when my pinky finger meets my thumb. Let's begin together. See if you can stay with me for my length, but if you've got a different length, then do that also. So let's begin. Breathing out, breathing in, holding and out. Belly's expanding, gentle breath, long breath, second breath, breathing in, holding and breathing out. Slow breath out, all the way out. Gentle breath. Soothing breath in, holding, breathing out, all the way out. Final breath in, holding, long breath out, all the way out. And so these slides will be available to you. If I click on the link here, particularly for the belly breathers, it will take us to a resources page where once again, you'll have a video on the 2 hands technique. And then it'll give you a sense of a breathing counter. How long's your breath? And I'd love you to get to the space where you can breathe in for about 4 seconds, 5 seconds. You can hold for 2 or 3 seconds. You can breathe out for 6 to 8 seconds. But initially, just get what's true for you in terms of your ratio, and then start to expand your capacity for the breath. One of the best ways for the belly breathers, for the chest breathers, is to, at nighttime, lie on your back starting this evening, set an alarm about this, where you lie down flat on your back. Your all the muscles around your belly are no longer holding up the torso, so they're all relaxed. You put both hands on your belly and you just start to expand your belly as you breathe in, creating that muscle memory. And this is the best way to train your capacity. So when you need the 4 breaths in real life, it's going to be there for you, but it won't be there for you if you haven't trained it whilst you're cool. And the same's true of the 4 breaths. If we're not learning the 4 breaths when we're cool and calm, at regular intervals, then we won't really be able to draw upon it in the match, in the game, in the heat of the stress and strains of our lives. And look, to help us with that, I've got a free self-care webinar on the 2nd of June. Everyone's welcome to attend that. And we'll go more deeply into the 4 breaths as a stress reduction delivery device. You'll get a 4 breaths schedule. So if this is of interest to you, then I recommend that you register for that. And this is the end of this part of the presentation. And so, look, thank you all for paying attention to that. Now, I know Maz can't understand the breathing, and I need you to wrap up, which is what I'm now doing. Thank you all.
Thanks, Cam. That was really great. Paris and everybody, the webinar information we'll send out in a wrap-up from this session. So we are out of time. I was hoping to do some questions, but we're out of time for that today. But if you do have questions, please feel free to send them through to us. Nat, if you wouldn't mind entering the email address that people should send it to in the chat box, you can send it through, and as part of the wrap-up, we'll try and get answers to some of these questions from our panelists, and we can put that into the wrap-up. So thank you all for your time and participation, and thank you, Kerry, Cam, and David for joining us today. To everybody who's on here, we really want these to work for you and to be helpful. So we're going to be sending a follow-up email that has some of the links, like the link to the webinar, question answers if you send questions through to us. So Nat will just put the email in there in the chat box. And this is part of a series of webinar events. So some upcoming dates and topics will be emailed to you with registration links. Future topics include dealing with redundancy, CV writing, and then other kind of relevant topics that are coming up during this period and beyond. So really appreciate everybody taking your time out of your day to come and join us and look after yourself. The email there that Nat's just put in is hello@work180.co. So if you have questions that we haven't had time to answer today, please feel free to email them through there. Thank you again to Kerry, Cam, and David, and to everybody for joining us today. And have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sam.